2023 is the 40th anniversary of Loughborough University's Centre for Research in Social Policy. To mark the occasion, we put together a series of short interviews with the Centre's leading researchers about issues you'll have heard a lot about lately. They are food insecurity, the cost of living and of dying, inflation and energy prices. Joining us for each episode will be directors, senior researchers and key figures from a number of charities and research institutes who will bring a fresh insight to the conversation. To find out more about any of the organisations featured, check out the episode description. I'm Peter Warzynski and I'm joined by Loughborough's Juliet Stone and Mark Jackson of Marie Curie. And today we'll be discussing the important topic of dying in poverty. Juliet, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself, what you do at Loughborough?
Yep, so I'm a Senior Research Associate at the Centre for Research in Social Policy. So I work on a lot of the quantitative research that we do at CRSP. So that's all the things to do with statistics and numbers, and work on lots of different projects to do with living standards and poverty.
Excellent. Mark?
So I'm Mark Jackson. I am Senior Research and Policy Manager at the end-of-life charity Marie Curie. I lead our work on financial insecurity for people at the end of life and their families, including leading our Dying in Poverty campaign, which has been informed by some work from the Centre for Research in Social Policy.
Brilliant, thank you. So Juliet, do you want to start? Mark mentioned the Dying in Poverty campaign, and it's based on the work that you did, a report that you wrote, Dying in Poverty. Can you tell us just briefly what that's about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the charity wanted to find out how many people were dying in poverty. It sounds like something quite simple, but actually we didn't know how many people were dying in poverty each year. And actually we thought that was an important thing to know, because we need to know how many people need help and what the scale of this problem is. So I did some research bringing together lots of different data sources, so mortality statistics from the ONS, household survey data, and I combined it all in a kind of statistical way that I won't go into, to produce this number that we estimate 90,000 people are dying in poverty every year.
Could you explain what you mean when you say poverty? Mm-hmm. How do you define that?
So what we used was a different measure of poverty that's produced by the Social Metrics Commission. And the difference with that is that it brings in what they call inescapable costs. So these are things that people basically have to pay for. So not just housing costs, but also taking account of the cost of childcare and also the cost of disability, which obviously for this project was really important. So that was the measure that we used for this project.
And the 90,000 people, could you explain, the demographic is that is all ages, mm-hmm. isn't it?
Yeah, so this was just the adult population. So we didn't look at children, partly because I think there are different drivers of poverty for children, and also because obviously that population is much smaller, and I think there are specific issues there for children that actually you couldn't really just add on to the project. So I think that's kind of a separate issue. So, but we did break everything down by age for working age and pensioners, and that was one of the most important findings that came out, was that people of working age with terminal illness are much more likely to be at risk of poverty than people of pension age, and this was one of the key findings really from the work.
Okay. And was that a surprise to you?
It was. I describe it as shocking, but not altogether surprising.
Right, yeah.
If you think about how the working age benefit system over the last decade or so has been devalued in real terms. There've been the cumulative impact of a series of policies like the benefit cap, the benefit freeze, some of the implications of the shift to universal credit, for example, and others, while at the same time the state pension has been inflation-proofed through the triple lock. We weren't altogether surprised at that, but I think the scale of the difference in risk for people who are living with terminal illness and who are coming to the end of their lives of falling below the poverty line is substantial. So if you are in working age, you are twice as likely as a person who dies in pension age to be below the poverty line in that last year of life. And what that means for people is 1 in every 4 people who dies in working age spends that last year of their lives below the poverty line. So that was a sobering statistic for us at Marie Curie.
it kick-started a campaign for you.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So the campaign is Nobody Should Die in Poverty, which I think everybody would agree with it as a principle, but it's something we're not delivering as a country at the moment. What we're really looking to do is to convince and influence policymakers in the UK government and also in devolved governments that really the key finding for us, the key implication, I should say, for us from Juliet's research is that the current working age benefit system is simply not fit for purpose. When the figures that Juliet's come up with for us include all the working age benefits people are getting. So the working age benefit system, after a decade of, as I say, being undervalued, is no longer an adequate safeguard for people at the end of life from falling below the poverty line. There's a significant amount of improvement needs to happen there. But for us, the really key conclusion that we drew and the core of our campaign is for working age people who are living with terminal illness, who are in that last year or so of life, to be able to access their state pension. We don't think it's right that people have paid into the system all of their working lives. They expect the state pension to be there for them at the end of lives, as we all do, but they're denied that support, which is a significant barrier against.
And is that at any age of terminal illness?
At any age, yeah. That is what we think should be happening. We don't think it's right that people are denied that support simply because their lives are cut short. And some other work that the centre have done for us has shown that actually that would lift around 8,500 people every year at the end of life out of poverty and effectively eliminate that additional risk that working age people face at the moment. So we think there is an absolute kind of moral imperative for government to take action there to stop people dying below the poverty line. And it is actually something that can be delivered affordably for the public purse as well.
Talk me through the campaign. How are you campaigning? Are you sort of lobbying? Is it a public campaign or?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a big public campaign. So recently we handed in a petition with more than 165,000 signatures from members of the public on it, which I think really demonstrates the resonance that the campaign is.
So that will trigger a debate then, won't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, we've had multiple debates in Parliament on various issues covered by the campaign. There was a private members' bill that was debated in the House of Commons, at the end of last year, covering some of the elements of the campaign, and we're continuing to make the case, to ministers, to members of Parliament, and to other decision makers within the DWP that this is something, as I say, that the government we think has a responsibility to do, but is also something it can deliver affordably, and we continue to make that case to them.
Okay, Juliet, can you tell me a little bit about what benefits are available at the moment, and then can you tell me about the gap and what needs to be done?
Obviously, some people who have terminal illness will still be working to a point, and they may not actually be eligible for any benefits initially until they sort of drop below a certain level. A lot of these benefits are means tested, so universal credit obviously is means tested. The disability benefits, again, there's a long process involved in getting access to disability benefits. That has improved slightly because there was a small policy win recently. That there's a system called the Special Rules for Terminal Illness relating to disability benefits. Okay. So previously it used to be that people had to be in the last 6 months of life to get access to this fast-tracked process to be able to get the disability benefits. But recently that's been changed to the last 12 months of life, which is still not good enough, I think, but is a win for people with terminal illness, which means they can then get access to those additional benefits to cover some of the costs that are associated. We know that disability benefits often don't cover the full cost, so again, there's going to be that gap there. But I think even if people of working age are getting access to all the means-tested benefits to which they're entitled, it's still not as much as the state pension. It's nowhere near as much as the state pension, so that's why that big gap. So apart from the working age people, there were other groups who you would probably expect to be the most vulnerable because it sort of mirrors what we see in the general population. But people from ethnic minority groups in particular had a very high risk of being in poverty at the end of life. I think it was over 40%, which is, again, pretty sobering that exists. And also families with children. were particularly vulnerable. And I think that's where some of the work that Marie Curie have been doing in their campaigning around getting help with childcare costs has come in, because actually those households are particularly vulnerable because they have costs that don't exist for households without children.
Mark, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, of course. So as Juliet says, working age people who have dependent children are more likely than any other group to fall below the poverty line in the aftermath of a diagnosis of terminal illness, which again is a really shocking finding. The challenge currently is that while support is available for parents with the cost of childcare, very, very often it is only available when both parents are working. And normally if one parent isn't working, you don't get that financial support with the cost of childcare. Now, I would imagine 99 times out of 100, that probably makes some sense. If one parent's not working, they're able to pick up the childcare responsibilities. However, if you're out of work because you're living with a long-term disability or you're living with terminal illness and you're having treatment, you're still going to need that help with caring for your children, but you don't get any support with the costs. And as Juliet highlighted earlier, that's an inescapable cost. That doesn't go away whatever the circumstances are. And again, we don't think it's right that people who are living with terminal illness, simply because they've had to come out of the labour market due to their condition, suddenly don't qualify for any financial support with childcare costs over and above all of the additional costs that come with living with a terminal illness. And that again is driving families below the poverty line at a much higher rate than even the general working age population.
And obviously that's raised even more now with the cost of living.
Absolutely.
And fuel costs as well.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who has paid a gas bill lately knows that the cost of living has gone up. That is only exacerbated for families living with terminal illness. I think people living with many terminal conditions have much higher energy needs than the average household, not only in terms of perhaps keeping the home heated for longer to a higher temperature than before. A lot of terminal conditions you need to stay warm to stave off risk of things like infection or pneumonia, for example, but also the cost of powering medical devices in the home. A lot of people who are being cared for at home, are maybe going to be on oxygen concentration or ventilation or similar devices. Those have to be powered, and that means that families affected by terminal illness have significantly higher energy needs than average, and also are not able to easily ration energy, which means the bills can go up very, very substantially. There are different estimates out there. We've seen estimates ranging anything from a 75% increase on average use to a 2.5 times increase on average use, depending on how you consider that. And again, for a lot of families affected by terminal illness, while there is some support out there, if you are over the pension age, for example, you'll get winter fuel payment or the warm home discount. That's not available to those families who are in working age. And we are particularly convinced, Marie Curie, by calls for a social tariff on energy bills, which would mean that for customers who are vulnerable, either because they're on a particularly low income or because they have a disability or they're living with terminal illness, that actually the energy providers should be providing those families with a discounted energy tariff, so they would effectively pay less at source for whatever energy they use, rather than simply claiming a credit back if they meet other eligibility criteria later.
Okay, and so you're campaigning for that. How are you doing that?
Well, I mean, the social tariff is an idea that there are a number of charities across the sector that are campaigning for. So, I mean, Citizens Advice, Age UK, Scope, Disability Rights UK, because there are a number of groups out there who are affected by the high cost of energy, particularly. And I think the social tariff to us feels like an idea whose time has come, especially since energy providers have made a lot of unexpected profit over the last couple of years for various reasons, and actually simply providing those people who do have those high needs, inability to ration energy and are particularly vulnerable, just that discount on their bills at source seems to us to be the best solution for those families.
Do you find it difficult to cut through the noise, because everybody is looking for the same, really, aren't they? It isn't just people at the end of life. It's sort of...
it's a crowded space, I think, but equally, I think there are worse things in my line of work than something being very, very topical. And I think the cost of living, and especially the cost of energy, is a very topical issue at the moment. And it's something on which the government is focused as well. So that has been helpful in terms of getting that on the agenda.
Yeah. Would sort of a broader policy change benefit you as well, I presume, rather than just...
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, something like the social tariff would not only affect people who are living with terminal illness, it would also affect a number of other groups. Our real kind of call there is for, if that is implemented, and we think it should be, that the criteria for that need to include people at the end of life as well. Yeah.
When you're talking to families that are coping with sort of end of life, family members and loved ones, what kind of anecdotal evidence do they give you that directs your campaigning?
Yeah, I mean, we're in touch with a number of families, and we hear quite regularly from people who are affected by these issues, and some of the stories are really harrowing of the positions people are in. So we've talked to mothers living with terminal conditions who are worried about not only how they're going to heat their home in the winter, but also how they're going to be able to afford to feed their young children because of the rising cost of living. We've talked to a couple where the woman has come out of the labour market just a few years before she would have been eligible to claim her state pension. She's in her early 60s, and they've gone from having a very comfortable life, both working, decent middle class life, but she's had to come out of work because of her condition. Her husband's had to come out of work to provide care for her, and they're now really, really struggling to make ends meet. So some of the stories, as I say, are really harrowing. This is a problem that isn't just at the level of statistics. Every one of those 90,000 people that Juliet mentioned, behind every single one of those is a story of a family who's really, really struggling to get by, while also living with and having to come to terms with the devastating reality that somebody in that family is living with a terminal illness and will not be with us much longer. And again, we really think that for those families, they should be able to spend that last bit of time they have together making memories, being with each other, doing what they want to do, all the bucket list items, as you call, but for so many people, that is simply impossible because every moment is spent worrying about money, worrying if there's enough money on the gas meter, worrying where the next meal is going to come from, and that's just not good enough in a society as rich as the UK.
The support shouldn't end once somebody has died because the family are still there and they're still in need of help. So what is available for families in that situation?
Yeah. So some people may be receiving carers allowance, but that doesn't continue once the person has died. So that is kind of cut off. There are bereavement benefits, but they're woefully inadequate and don't last for very long. And if people have had to come out of the labour market, as Mark was saying in the example he gave, it's not necessarily that easy to just jump back into the labour market for lots of reasons, both for practical reasons, but also for the emotional reasons of, you're dealing with a major bereavement. Should you be expected to just return to how your life was before this devastating thing happened? I think there is some help there, but it's as I say, it's woefully inadequate. So I'm now working on another project funded by Marie Curie with some colleagues in Sheffield and Leeds, and that is specifically looking at poverty in people caring for people at the end of life and looking at how they're affected by having to leave the labour market and how that affects household income, but also looking beyond bereavement and looking at how their finances are affected in the longer term. So that project's just started, but hopefully we'll get some good evidence from that as well to inform future campaigning around that issue.
Is there support available from Marie Curie in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, we provide bereavement support to families who are affected. I mean, that's very much in the realm of kind of emotional support. We have a 24/7 telephone line that people can call to really discuss all aspects of death, dying and bereavement. We do provide some guidance to people who are struggling with their finances as well. I mean, as Juliet says, though, the challenge really for people who are caring and family members is that so much support is cut off at the point where the cared for person, the loved one, dies. And again, we don't think that's that's good enough. If someone is receiving carer's allowance because they are a carer and then they've had to come out of the labour market to do so, we know for a fact that the impact that has on someone's someone's labour market participation, their earnings, etc., goes on long after the person that they're looking after has passed away. And again, it feels to us that there needs to be a much greater recognition of that in terms of policy and the financial support we provide to people, but also the emotional support that we provide to people. For example, we've just come out of 2 years of a pandemic where a lot more people were dying in 2020 and 2021 certainly, and it was very clear to us throughout that process that formal bereavement support services provided or funded through the NHS were simply stretched well beyond capacity, and that will continue to be the case in future. Not everybody who needs that kind of support gets it. And I think one thing Marie Curie has called for some significant time from government is to have a much more integrated cross-departmental strategy when it comes to bereavement that covers not only that support that people need emotionally and in terms of their own well-being, but also the employment support, the financial support as well.
So what can people do to help?
Yeah, people can go to our website, which is www.mariecurie.org.uk/poverty. You can sign up there for updates and information on the campaign. We're regularly publishing new evidence, new insights, new information about the campaign there. So if people are interested, they can go and follow there. Also follow us on social media at Marie Curie UK. And again, we're constantly talking about the campaign and our efforts there. So if people want to stay updated with the work we're doing, and indeed with the work Juliet's doing for us, you can do that there.
Excellent. And you mentioned before, you mentioned the petition. Could you tell us about the end result then? What happened?
Yeah, of course. So as I mentioned, the petition that we had on our website had more than 165,000 signatures from members of the public, which is a fantastic result, well exceeded the expectations we had for it in terms of support. That was handed in at the end of February 2023 to number 10 Downing Street. So that was a couple of our supporters who are actually have lived experience of some of these challenges. They came down to Westminster for the day, along with some of our colleagues, and also our celebrity ambassador, Chris Kamara, the former footballer, kind of handed that in to number 10 Downing Street, which was a fantastic result for us. We continue to do work and campaigning there. We continue to be pushing for meetings with government. We're writing constantly to ministers to get this on their agenda, as well as having that raised in Parliament as often as we can. We have a very, very supportive group of MPs from across parties within Westminster who are really engaged with these issues, and as often as possible we're working with them to raise these issues and get responses from government to really push this forward.
Excellent. And Juliet, what's next with your research?
Yep. So in addition to the work on carers that I mentioned earlier, I'm also involved in a project looking at benefit uptake in people with terminal illness. That's with colleagues at King's College London and various other people. So I'm involved in that, and I see this as kind of a collaboration with Marie Curie, and I think we're in sort of constant discussions about what needs to be done next. I think we're probably planning to do some work on the fuel poverty work to see how that looks in the general population, how many people are affected, what might help to lift people out of fuel poverty at the end of life, and also perhaps some stuff on childcare too, to feed into the campaigning. So yeah, it's kind of, this isn't the end of this kind of story, I don't think. And I think it's certainly one of the most rewarding sort of projects that I've worked on. I think a lot of the work we do at CRSP involves kind of thinking about living standards and poverty, and it's all really important. But I think there's something that really sort of, strikes a chord when you're talking about people at the end of life. As Mark was saying, they're not just in poverty, they're also having to deal with all this other stuff that is actually really, really difficult and really devastating. And I think of all people in the population, you know, perhaps the most vulnerable, you know, in emotional terms, in financial terms. So yeah, certainly glad to be working on this with Marie Curie. Yeah.
Excellent. Oh, thank you both, that was great. And thank you for joining us. Thanks to Juliet and Mark for their insight. And if you'd like to find out more about the research that we've been discussing or any of the other topics, check out the links in the episode descriptions. We have more shows based around the work carried out by CRSP and their partners, so keep an eye out for those. Goodbye.